Hello, my name is Ray Kruse, your Food Systems Program Coordinator and Master Gardener Coordinator right here at the ICU Extension Outreach Office at Dubuque County. And today we are talking about garden produce anatomy. Now before we dig into this kit, I would like to thank our funding sources today. And if you're a resident of Dubuque County, you can thank your Dubuque County ICU Extension Outreach Office. And I would also like to thank our partnering organizations for bringing this program to you if you're in Dubuque County. Now, if you're outside of Dubuque County, I'd also like to thank those other partnering organizations, and you'll know who that is based on who's bringing you your kit today. Now, I'd like to talk about why it is important for us to know the anatomy of our fruits and vegetables and why that's important. And so a good example that I'd like to provide to you is I had a client one time that came in and he had an apple tree and he was just so frustrated with it. He was giving it fertilizer, he was pruning it, he watered it, he made sure he planted it correctly, and ultimately he wasn't getting any apples. And he came to our office seeking some help, saying, you know, I think that there is a nutrient problem and we should really test the soil. And I asked the individual, well, you know, are you getting some flowers on your trees? And he's like, yeah, I'm getting some flowers. And I asked you, you know, do you see any little apples come after those flowers fall off the tree? And he said, you know, I don't really see any baby fruit, and I think that that's because of the nutrient problem. Well, fruits, in order for them to be produced on a tree or a plant or something like that, they actually need to be pollinated. And being that the individual is getting some flowers but wasn't getting any fruit, the question of whether we're having decent pollination is actually brought into the picture, and maybe we might not have a nutrient problem at all. Not saying we can't rule that out, but maybe there's a larger problem here that we're overlooking in this situation. And by knowing that apples are a fruit is really helpful in this situation, knowing that pollination has to occur in order to get an apple. So that's why it's important for us to know whether we're dealing with a vegetable or a fruit, a root or a leaf, or, you know, whatever it is that we're eating. Now, culinarily, we typically think of a tomato as a vegetable. You know, it's an annual plant. We seed it with the rest of our vegetables. We typically don't stick it in pies and jams and things like that. So we think of it as a vegetable, but really it's actually a fruit. And on the other hand, we have rhubarb, which is commonly thought of as a fruit too, or a fruit itself. But you know what? Pollination doesn't need to occur in order for us to get rhubarb, and it's actually a petiole. It's actually part of the plant, and so it is actually botanically considered a vegetable and not a fruit. But we think of it as a fruit because it is bitter, and we have to add a little bit of sugar, and we turn it into jams and jellies and things like that. So next time you're eating your rhubarb pie and someone asks you, did you eat your vegetables first? You can say with confidence, you bet I did. So now what we're going to do is we're going to equate all of our plant parts here to kind of like a plant roadmap. So I have this sunflower here that we're going to tie our vegetables back to so that we can have an idea as to where we're coming from with the vegetables we're looking at. So here we have on this sunflower here the fruiting head, and we'll talk about the different variations of fruiting bodies that we can have on a plant. We have the obvious stem that goes down the sunflower here. We have the leaves. We have a petiole, which connects the leaf to the stem. And then as we go down further on the sunflower here, we have these lateral roots, and we also have our classic taproot as well. So we're going to talk about how these vegetables kind of tie into this big roadmap that we're using here, this visual roadmap. The first thing we're going to start out here with is our carrot. So you can go in your kit and pull out your carrot here. Now, when looking at our carrot here, we just think of it, you know, we just have one large taproot here, and this really isn't everything that exists underneath the soil that's feeding that carrot. We'd like to think that this is the only thing that's providing us the energy and water to the above ground foliage when we're growing carrots in the garden, but that's not the case. If we look at the side of your carrot, perpendicular to the length of the carrot here, we have these lateral scars, and those are actually scars from lateral roots that came out the side of the carrot, and those actually help the carrot gain nutrients and energy throughout the summer. So when we yank that carrot out of the ground, those come off, and they've been bred to do that and release that root so that we actually have a carrot that is more appealing for us to eat. Now, next thing we're going to do here is we're going to go to the top of our carrot here. This is called the crown. And we have this black ring that's going to exist on top, and we're going to go about 1/4 of an inch down from the top there. And we're going to slice that off with a knife. And the thing that I want to highlight to you with this crown here is that when we see carrots grown in the garden, we obviously see the crown that's right at the surface of the soil. We'll see some leaves coming out and petioles. And that foliage there we might think is actually a stem, but that's actually not the stem. Our stem exists right there at the base of that carrot foliage there. And unfortunately I couldn't get carrots with foliage, but that right there is our entire carrot stem. And when we look at our sunflower here and tie this back into our road map, we see a huge stem here on our sunflower here, but this is actually a compressed stem is what the carrot has. So all the rest of the leaves that come out and petioles that come out, those are not actually the stem of the carrot. So there's just a little bit of a fun fact for you there. Now, a little tip about growing carrots in your garden. When selecting a carrot from a catalog to plant in your garden, you might see them say or describe it that it's a Châtenay type, or a Nantes type, or an Imperator, or a Danvers type. And if you see Imperators and you have heavier soils, Imperators tend not to do as well in heavier soils. They tend to do a lot of forking and turn out to be really goofy looking. So if you have heavier soils like what we have up here in northeast Iowa and especially close to Dubuque, I wouldn't try growing an Imperator type carrot. Now if you have a Châtenay type carrot or a Danvers type carrot, those do very well in our area, and you can have better luck with less forking and things like that because they're actually more of a shorter carrot and they have more of a wedge shape, and that deals better with our soils here, our heavier soils that we have here in northeast Iowa. You can also have good luck too with the Nantes type as well. So those I've had good luck with as well too. So that's just a little tip about growing carrots here in Dubuque County and in the northeast Iowa region if you have heavier soils. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our kit and we're going to pull out our next vegetable here, and that is a parsley, a piece of parsley. And this is obviously a leaf. And when looking back at our sunflower here, we obviously know what the leaf is, but something that I also wanted to use this to demo to you as well is that this, what we would maybe call a stem coming from the leaf, is actually the petiole. And that is not actually the stem that connects this leaf to the ground. This is yeah, like I said, the petiole. And when we look at the sunflower here, that's what this section of the plant is. And some other examples of vegetables that are petioles as well are Swiss chard and our rhubarb that we commonly consider a fruit, which is actually a vegetable because we're actually eating part of the plant. So that is a petiole. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup and I'll have you join me right back. Welcome back. We are going to turn our attention to our onion that is included in your kit. Now your onion will probably be a lot smaller. But for the sake of demonstrating over the camera today, we're going to be using a larger onion. So the first thing we're going to be doing in looking at our onion is we are going to slice it in half here. So we're going to take our knife here, and sorry, I don't have a very sharp one, but we are going to slice our onion in half. Okay, the next thing we're going to do here is at the base of our onion, we're going to see where all of these individual layers come together, and we're going to slice that off as well with our knife. Now what we're going to do is we are going to look at that and think about, does this look like something familiar that we saw earlier in this activity? Are you at all thinking about that crown from the carrot? If you're thinking about that crown, you're absolutely right. And what this is this is also a compressed stem, just like our carrot. And we call this actually the basal plate. And if we look at how this onion typically grows in the garden, we have our roots growing beneath the basal plate. That basal plate is a compressed stem. And our layers of the onion grow above that basal plate. Now, being that we look at where our layers of the onion are above that root, does that tell you anything about what we're actually eating here? Let's go back to our sunflower roadmap here for our plant. We imagine our compressed stem down here, and the roots are beneath that stem. What's above that stem, or what's next on that plant, is actually the leaves. And we look at this here at our onion basal plate. Those layers of onion are actually leaf bases, and we call those scales. So, each one of these individual layers of the onion are considered a leaf base there. So now when we think about how these onions actually grow in the ground, being that this is the roots come out the base of the onion, I'll actually use this here. Since the roots come out the base of the onion and this is the leaf bases here, a lot of folks ask me, why their onions don't turn out round and they're oftentimes kind of cup-shaped. And the reason why is because a lot of folks commonly plant their onions too deep into the ground, and these leaves really don't like growing beneath the ground very much. If we think about our sunflower here, are there any of the leaves here that really actually want to grow into the soil? Not really. They're, the stem here is compressed, but there it's long, and we don't really see many leaves that want to grow in the soil, and the same thing applies to this onion here too. They don't like all their leaves buried in the soil. They really just like this little bit buried right there, and then the roots are what access the water and nutrients from the soil. So planting our onions too deep can be a problem and gives us kind of that cup-shaped. And they only need to be planted in the soil about 3/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch at planting. If you're doing transplants, if you're doing seeds, that's another story. But that's why we don't want to plant our onions too deep. And especially if we have harder soils or clay-like soils, they don't like to give as much as sand. Sand will kind of smooth out or give as the plant starts to grow. And clay soils just kind of hold their shape. And even if you plant them at a shallow depth like I do in my garden, I still get vase-shaped or V-shaped onions, that don't end up really nice and round because my soils are just so hard. Now, the next thing I'd like us to do here is to also take our onion like this. And what we're going to do here is we're going to slice it the lengthwise here too. And there we go. And the outer dried area of that onion is actually considered the tunic. It is a dried layer of the onion, and it protects it from being dried out. And now that we've cut our onion in a different direction here, we can also see here too in the center of our onion, there are actually multiple little layers of onions inside this bigger onion. And that is another testament to the fact that that basal plate at the bottom is a modified stem, because there's other different areas where onions can shoot out and give us different onions inside of our bigger onion. Now that's not as desirable for your onion rings and things like that because they end up smaller. You have, in this specific onion here, you have about 3 different sets of onion rings. But that's another testament as to the fact that this basal plate is actually a compressed stem. When selecting our onions from a seed catalog, what we'll look for is because our onions don't necessarily grow a bulb without certain environmental cues. And the environmental cue that onions look for is day length. And when we're looking for onion seeds in the catalog, we're going to look for long day onions. When we have those long sunny days in July and June, those are what trigger this plant here to start thinking about winter and putting efforts into bulbing up and food storage for the winter. So, and actually onions are a biennial. So when they go into their first year's worth of growth, they bulb up and store energy for the winter in preparation for their reproductive year the following year, or the second year of growth. So we want those long day onions. That will give us a larger onion. If we planted a short day onion, they'll actually bulb maybe a little sooner because our days get longer early in the year, and they'll actually be encouraged to bulb sooner. You'll get a smaller bulb. If you want a larger onion, you get a long day onion for our environment up here. Now, I also have questions coming into our office about storage problems with onions, and there can be a couple things that contribute to that. And the first is are you eating or are you planting pungent onions, or are you planting sweet onions? And your pungent onions are the ones that really make you cry when you cut them up on the counter. And those are the onions that do a lot better job of storing, as opposed to your sweet onions, and which is actually what this is. I can smell that. I'm not at all going to be crying here soon. So this is actually a sweet onion, and it won't store as long as those pungent onions will and our root cellars throughout the winter. There's also another thing that factors into the storage of an onion, and that has to do with the way we plant them, and if that onion has been triggered into a reproductive mode or reproductive life cycle. So, like I said, onions are a biennial plant. They will grow vegetatively the first year and go into reproduction the second year. They're not worried about storing energy reserves into the onion the second year. They're more focused on seed production. And if we plant our onions from seed, you will almost never have a problem with onions having or being triggered into their reproductive phase and flowering. And we commonly see this a little bit more with the transplanted onions. So if you get the onions that come in bunches in the spring, they come in about, rubber bands of about 75 little onions. Usually those will do a really good job of growing in the garden, and they're not triggered into thinking that they need to be in their reproductive phase. But we see a lot of this with those onion sets that are sold in the store by the pound. And though they are the easiest way to plant an onion in your garden, the process of growing those onion sets, drying them out, and storing them in preparation for your own garden makes some think that they actually went through a winter time. And so they're actually focused on reproduction, and you'll commonly see them flower. And if you see those onions flowering in your garden, that's a sign they're not really going to store well for the winter, because they already completed their first winter life cycle and they were focused on reproduction the second year. They're not worried about living after that because they were focused on producing that seed head. So these are some tips, and hopefully you learned a little bit about the anatomy of an onion, and I'll have you join me right back here for the fruit portion. Welcome back. We're going to talk about the fruit portion of our activity now. But before we dig into that, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about our plant roadmap here and where we've come from. So we've talked about our root here at the base of the plant and how our carrot is at. And we've also talked about our stem and how that is kind of compressed in our carrots and onions, and how our onions are swollen leaf bases. And we've also talked about our petioles, which is commonly our rhubarb, when we talked about that with the parsley that I included in the kit here. We also talked about our leaves too. So now we're going to focus on the upper end of the plant, which is this reproductive area that commonly needs to be pollinated in order to get a fruit. And we're going to talk about the different forms of that now. So what we're going to do here, you should have a recycled yogurt cup filled full of some fruit specimens, and we're going to talk about those here today. First thing I'm going to have you take out of your cup is we're going to take out our tomato. And we're going to slice it lengthwise. Here. There we go. And we open up our tomato here. We will see obviously the seeds on the inside here, and they came from the fact that we pollinated this tomato here in order for it to form this fleshy fruit that we're going to enjoy. To further prove that point, we have a blossom end here at the tip of the tomato, and at the top we have the stem end, which is where the pedicel connects to the tomato. Now, you might have also heard of something called a peduncle, and the difference between a peduncle and a pedicel is that a pedicel is multiple branches of a peduncle. So it's kind of hard to keep them straight, but that's what that is that connects there. There is also a few little leaves at the base of a tomato plant right before the fruit that are commonly disconnected upon picking or shortly after picking, and those are the calyx. And those are removed, and those honestly make for a better harvest because they prevent poking of the fruit when it's all put into a bin or a bowl or something like that. Now what we have here today is a cherry tomato, and if you stick your finger around the back side of where those seeds are, you'll notice that there's only two individual cavities that you'll find seeds in these tomatoes, and those are called locules. And that's common in cherry tomatoes to only have 2. Now if you have a bigger tomato, that's not uncommon to have 3 or many, many more. So now one important key lesson about a tomato here is that they are self-pollinating. A lot of our fruits can self-pollinate and actually result in better fruit if you can cross-pollinate them. And an apple is one of those plants that almost requires cross-pollination. There are a few odd cultivars that don't need to be cross-pollinated, but almost always you'll have to cross-pollinate an apple, but almost always a tomato will self-pollinate itself. And the way their flowers are designed too, they don't allow for insects to come in very well and access that pollen. They rely on a lot of shaking to get that pollen shook up inside that flower and to attach to the female portion of the flower there. So that's an interesting little thing about tomatoes there. Now we're going to dig into our cherry. And you're going to find our cherry just a little bit different. It doesn't have those cavities that form the seeds inside. So what we're going to do here is we're going to slice our cherry around the exterior. And you won't be able to slice all the way through because we have that pit in the center we're going to talk about here in a second. So I sliced around the exterior. I'm just going to twist it. And off comes the one side. And we're going to discard the one side without the pit in it. We're going to talk about the side with the pit. Now this is something called a drupe. And the reason why it's a drupe is because it's got a stony center that is surrounded by a fleshy exterior. Now with this drupe, we have certain parts here that I'm going to highlight, and we're collectively in the future going to call it the pericarp. So we'll keep that title in mind, but on this individual drupe, we can further dissect the pericarp down into the exocarp, the mesocarp, which is this fleshy part that we eat here, and the endocarp. So those are the 3 parts here of the pericarp that we will just call the pericarp going forward. But this is a great example of a way that you can dissect those down. Now if you take this pit out and you crack this endocarp here, you'll find the cherry seed on the inside. So yeah, we also have the pedicel, which I'm hanging the cherry by right now, and the blossom end is on the other side that has a little scar there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to dig into our raspberry. And this is where we can start contrasting with what we were seeing. So we saw the cherry here. We've only got the one seed inside of this one drupe that we just looked at. We had multiple seeds inside locules here. Now with this raspberry, we're going to also dissect this as well. We're just going to cut this in half. And when you cut it in half, you're going to see a series of little juice pockets. And if we look at this and contrast this with the cherry that we just looked at here, you know, we have a fleshy exterior here that covers a hard seed in the center. And if you're thinking that this also looks like a drupe, you're correct. And that's what this is. This raspberry here is made up of multiple little drupes. Now you might be thinking, well, you know, this cherry only had, you know, one seed to reproduce here, or not reproduce, but to grow here, and this actually also has a whole bunch of little seeds, and each one of those seeds has its own female organ. So, and you'll see those female organs on the outside is called the pistil, and each little drupe has its own little hair, and that was the female organ that was pollinated in order to signal to that drupe it needs to swell. And that's what happened there. Now the male portion of this fruit here fell away when we pulled that raspberry off of the plant, and then we left back the rasp. Now the rasp is what we call the receptacle, and that'll be important going forward in the future. We'll use that term again. Now the receptacle was left behind along with the stamens, which is the male portion of the flower, and also which is the green little petals that protected the flower when it was being pollinated, called the calyx. So that is our raspberry there. And we're going to contrast that with our last fruit in the cup here. And what that, now obviously it's a strawberry, but let's look at the strawberry a little closer here. We see all of these individual little seeds here, and we look at them and think that, you know, that's all they are, is just a little seed there, but we notice that they're not covered by a fleshy material like our raspberry. We had our raspberry here, and we looked at the individual little juice pockets. Each one was a drupe. These little seeds here aren't covered with a juice pocket. And the coincidental thing here well, we'll go back to the raspberry. This was called a drupe, and the pericarp is the entire area that surrounds each one of those seeds. And on the raspberry, the pericarp is combined with, or sorry, the strawberry, the pericarp is combined with the seed. So if we take off the seed on this strawberry here, both the seed and the pericarp is all included in that one little seed there. So, it's kind of hard to guess, what exactly are we eating here if we're not eating, the drupe or, anything else. What's exactly that we're eating that is swollen and juicy and tasty? So now we're going to start dissecting this strawberry here. We're going to cut it in half. And upon cutting in half, we'll notice here that we have what we call the calyx here, which are these green little leaves, excuse me, that are on the strawberry. And behind that calyx there, you'll find little stamens, and those are also the male portion of the flower. And remember, on the raspberry, those were left behind when we picked the raspberry. So we've identified that our pericarp and our seed is on the outside of the strawberry, and our calyx and stamens are here right at the tip of the strawberry. What's left is the receptacle, and that is what we're eating. So whenever those strawberry seeds are pollinated and the pericarp receives its male portion of the pollinating cycle, it signals the receptacle to start swelling, and that's what we're eating when we eat a strawberry. There is the receptacle. So hopefully you were able to follow along there and contrast the fact that when we're eating a strawberry, we're eating a receptacle. And each one of these seeds, by the way, is also called an achene, being that the pericarp and the seed is all in one, is called an achene. So we have an achene on a receptacle there for our strawberry. We have multiple little drupes that make up our raspberry, and we actually leave the receptacle behind. Here on the cherry, we are eating one single drupe. And for the tomato here, we're eating a fruit that has a couple locules in it filled full of seed. So hopefully you learned a little bit about fruits here. I'll have you join me back in 1 second after I clean up, and we'll focus on one more activity. Welcome back, and we are going to focus on our last activity, the artichoke. And I was really excited that we were able to include the artichoke with your activity for you to enjoy today. And it's not your average garden produce for somebody here in Iowa. And the reason why is because they actually require a winterizing period in order to produce an artichoke. The problem is, for them to survive the winter, the hardiest winter that they're able to survive is something like a California winter and not an Iowa winter. So they take a little bit of extra care and almost someone with a greenhouse to be able to get them to overwinter. So I've done it before. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work too. But this is a fun activity to look at, and we're going to check it out here right now. So first thing we're going to do with our artichoke is we are going to slice it in half. And we're just going to take, it's going to take a very sharp knife because these are very hard to cut through. It's kind of like cutting apart a lobster, because lobsters, there's a lot of stuff there, and in the end, there's not a lot that you're going to get out of it to eat, but the taste and what you get in the end is worth it. So we're going to slice this up here. There we go. Awesome. So we have the inside of our artichoke right here. And looking at this right away, you might notice there's a few commonalities with some other things we've seen already. We have this section here. This is called the peduncle. And why this is the peduncle and not the pedicel like a lot of the other fruits and vegetables we've been seeing is because this here only has one stem that services one bud. So that one stem services one bud, that means that it is a peduncle and not a pedicel. Unlike we have a cluster of raspberries or a cluster of strawberries, that equals a pedicel. So, looking a little further in here, you might see these individual little green leaflets here. And you might be like, you know what, those are calyxes, right? Well, not really. They're actually, we're getting into a different family of plants here with this artichoke, and what that is the Asteraceae family, and that includes everything from dandelions to, you guessed it, our roadmap plant, the sunflower. And so the sunflower has a lot of the same parts that our artichoke will have. So we call these phyllaries, is what these outer green-like petals are. And the sunflower here also has phyllaries on them too. That's what these outer green petals are right here. So we have those phyllaries there, and we take a closer look at the inside of this artichoke here, and we have what we call the receptacle. And again, going back to our sunflower here, we're going to look at our receptacle here. We're going to scuff off a few of the flowers here. They're actually going to fall off, and we're going to see behind each one of those individual flowers that are on the head of the sunflower, we're going to see a seed. And if we take out those seeds, we're going to see a white plate in the back. And that white plate is also called the receptacle. So we have a receptacle on our sunflower, a receptacle on our artichoke, which is very common in the Asteraceae family. Now you might be like, well, looking at this is all wonderful and everything, but how do you eat it, right? You know, there's all this spiny stuff here. And by the way, artichokes are actually a thistle. If you ever do choose to grow one as an experiment and a challenge, because they're not easy to grow, they look like the world's largest bull thistle in the backyard. But anyway, they're rather spiny, and you eat them. There's two different ways to eat them. You can first eat them by taking one of the phyllaries, and well, you don't do this first. You actually cook them first. You can steam them or cook them. And then you take one of the phyllaries and you just rip it out. And at the base of the phylary is some meaty substance there, and you can't probably see it very well on the camera, but it's really thick. I can poke it with the needle here, and you take that individual meaty substance and dip it in butter, and you just scrape it between your teeth, and oh, is it delicious. So that is one way to eat an artichoke. Now, you may have heard in the store of artichoke hearts, and you might be like, well, how do we get artichoke hearts? Well, the actual heart of the artichoke is rather small relative to the rest of the artichoke. So the artichoke heart actually is a little bit of this white stuff that goes down the end of the peduncle here, and it includes this receptacle here and a little bit of the base of the phyllaries, and that is the heart of our artichoke. That's it. We also have some of this other furry material in here. You can see this here. It's, whitish and fluffy, and that is called the choke, and literally if you eat that you'll choke, because it's that distasteful, and the texture is just very odd and sticky. So what you'll want to do is we'll carve this heart out here. It sounds kind of brutal, but we're going to carve this artichoke out here for you. And again, keep in mind, when we look at this and we get done taking out this artichoke heart, let's think, are we eating a fruit or are we eating a vegetable? So first thing we're going to do here, like I said, we're going to take this receptacle and a little bit of the peduncle here. So we're going to take our knife and continue to slice this off here. And again, you're going to want a really sharp knife to do this, and don't cut yourself because they are rather tough. So I'm going to carve back those phyllaries that we talked about here. We're going to continue carving them back until we get to some soft material here. And we're going to continue cutting that off till all the green is pretty much off. And out of the interest of time and the size of my knife, I wasn't able to save much of the peduncle. But now I've got the heart carved out here, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take our fingers and we're going to gradually peel back the choke part of the plant here. So we're going to take back that feathery duff that we see here, and we're going to peel it off the receptacle. And it's going to take just a second here, and we'll get that peeled off, and we'll have inside this here are really nice and soft artichoke heart. that you can steam or cook or do what you choose with. So yeah, peeling that out can get a little bit challenging, but with time you'll get it out of there. And that feathery duff there needs to come out, because I've eaten it before. If you don't get all out of there, it will. It's just an unpleasant texture. It's just very, very hard to eat. So there we go. So we have that all carved out of there, and there is our artichoke heart right there. We have the base of the receptacle there. We have a base of some of those meaty filaries right there, and that's what we can eat and cook and put in our foods. Now, my question still stands. Let's think about this. Are we eating a fruit or a vegetable? Because this receptacle is just like our strawberry, where we have a receptacle that we're eating, but it's not enlarged yet. So I'll pause this video for 10 seconds, and we'll come right back and we'll reveal that answer. And getting to our question, I don't know what you guessed, but if you guessed vegetable, you are correct. Now the reason why is because it is true, we are eating a receptacle like the strawberry, but this receptacle that we would be eating with this artichoke didn't occur or grow with the need of pollination. So we have that there, and it hasn't quite pollinated yet, hasn't bloomed, and we're just eating that fleshy receptacle here. Now this receptacle on the strawberry didn't become fleshy until after pollination. So this is actually a fruit, and the artichoke is actually a vegetable. So I hope you learned a lot today about the anatomy of your garden produce, because it is really helpful to be able to understand terms, and also to be able to communicate with others when you do have a problem and have common language. So if you ever have any questions in the future about your garden or anything like that, feel free to contact your local county ISU Extension office. And this is Ray Kruse at the ISU Extension Outreach Office of Dubuque County. And like I tell everyone, happy growing, everybody.